Welcome to the Non-Obvious Insights Show. I'm your host, Rohit Bhargava, and every week I go through hundreds of news sources to curate the most interesting and underappreciated stories you might have missed. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll talk about what happens when the world starts rejecting American tourists, why many small businesses are ditching their banks, how Art Basel is adapting to a virtual world, and what every concept for the home of tomorrow has in common, including IKEA's latest one that they just launched this week in Poland. In addition, I'll feature another segment of the non-obvious double take story of the week that should get you to think twice, and another selection for my non-obvious book release of the week. We are live streaming to Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope, and the show starts right now. Happy Thursday, Non-Obvious Nation. We are back for another bunch of exciting stories of the week. And I have to say, for the last couple of weeks, I've been working on a little bit of a secret project. And you might have seen it in the email newsletter this week. I just announced it. It's a virtual summit on book marketing. And I'm super excited about it. It's going to be taking place on July 8th. And in addition to me talking about the launch of non-obvious megatrends and all of the things that I did around that, including our scavenger hunts and interesting ad campaigns and just everything that we did, I've also interviewed more than 20 individuals who are from various parts of the publishing industry. So I've got authors, I've got all sorts of people, and it's going to be really, really awesome. It's going to be a gathering of all of these people together. It's going to be fantastic, really, really cool, and I hope you can make it. So that's the URL at the bottom to register for that, and it's totally free. And then there's a bonus part where we're going to be doing like a featured Q&A, and it's going to be a really fun really fun time live event. Cool. So it's a new experiment for us. It should be very cool, but that is one of the things that I'm super excited about. And the other things are related to the stories of the week. And the first story of the week, which really got me thinking as somebody who travels a lot, was this piece from Skift and my friend Rafat Ali, who talked about how many countries around the world may be banning American tourists because they're afraid of the health concerns of America. And what the article goes on to talk about is just how America as a destination may be waning in popularity as well. And this story got me worried a little bit as somebody who lives in America and who travels from America, because maybe there are places that I won't be able to go, and that's bad news for me. But the other thing that I looked at and what I started thinking about is the implications of this, because when anytime a trend like this, anytime a story like this comes up, there's a trend sometimes associated with it in terms of what we're going to do. And one of the things that I think is going to happen, and has already happened in America, is many more people will be doing road trips. And there was this really fun story that I also saw this week of what Fast Company thought a hit product of the summer might be, which is a pee bag. So it's the summer sleeper hit, a bag you pee into. Called Travel John. And this article was talking about the many different uses for this Travel John product, which I thought was funny and slightly sad at the same time. I mean, if this does become that big major hit, then that's going to be a challenge, I think, for for some of us, because I don't love road trips and I definitely don't want to be peeing into a bag, but people are afraid of going to regular bathrooms. And so maybe this will be the sleeper summer hit product. And we'll have to watch that. So definitely post a comment if you're watching this on live on video. Post a comment if you tried one of these pee bags. Apparently they're super popular with private investigators who have to like sit in their car and watch people for long periods of time. I didn't know that. I read that in the article, but I guess there's other audiences for this besides the road trip people. So anyway, interesting story there. Another story that I was reading from American Banker, which is a publication for the financial services industry, that really struck home for me was how many small businesses are really frustrated with their banks right now, because in America, one of the stimulus packages that the government has introduced are these Paycheck Protection Program loans. And in order to get these loans, you have to apply for them and you need some help from your bank. And what's been happening is many small business owners who have had long-standing relationships with their banks now have this very real moment when they needed help from their bank, and the banks haven't shown up. And in many cases, they've said, we're not accepting loans, we can't help you. And so now these business owners have been forced to do one of the things that I think none of us like to do, which is make a change that takes a lot of work. People tend to stay in financial services relationships in part because it's a pain in the butt to switch. And now, because of this, people have become so frustrated that they are switching. And there's a moment of opportunity and concern if you happen to be in this industry, which is how do you hold on to these customers when they're so frustrated by the lack of what you were able to deliver for them? And I'm really seeing examples of this kind of across the board. And so this is something to watch not only in financial services, but in whatever sector you happen to be in, particularly if you have recurring customers who you've sort of maybe started to take for granted in some ways. And it's just a wake up call, I think, to all of us that we shouldn't be taking those people who uh, pay us, right? Our clients, our customers, we shouldn't be taking them for granted. We have to remember that in this moment when they really need us, we have to be able to show up, whatever that means for your business. Um, Another story that I thought was entertaining in its cleverness was a film. I'll put quotes around that word, film, called Unsubscribe, topped the US box office this past week, actually 2 weeks ago, by raking in a grand total of just over $25,000 in ticket sales. And it turns out that there's actually two filmmakers and actors who realized that because all Hollywood blockbusters and mainly a lot of films that get released into theater have been on delay right now, there's an opportunity to stand out across these weekly lists that get computed based on ticket sales, based on box office revenue. And when they started looking at the numbers, they realized that essentially, in order to top the list, they'd have to do about $25,000 in ticket sales. Now, there's a process in the film industry called four-walling, where essentially you can book out an entire theater, give the revenue for the theater, and then resell the seats yourself or host your own premiere, and that counts as ticket revenue. And that's essentially what they did to reach the top of the box office with a film that was basically shot entirely on Zoom, and written and produced and shot and edited in about 5 days. And it was just a funny reminder that sometimes these lists that we assign a lot of importance to, that we think are really, really difficult to make it onto, actually can be gamed when you know the rules of the system, when you know the way that the lists are put together. And in this moment when all of the big budget films have gone out of theaters, it was sort of this perfect opportunity for two random guys to come along and have a chart topping blockbuster hit that was filmed on Zoom and basically cost them 25 grand in tickets, ticket purchases through box offices in order to hit. This is one of the things that we're going to talk about in the virtual summit on book marketing too, which is what does it take to hit a bestseller list? And that's one of the categories that a lot of people wonder about when it comes to book marketing and when it comes to launching a book, which is like, what does it take to get to bestseller status? And so that's one of the topics that we're going to really dig into in that summit. So I hope you can join us for that. Another story that I was spending actually way too much time this week tracking was Art Basel, which is a huge art festival, and how they have moved a lot of the experience of that in terms of seeing the art online. And lots of museums have galleries where you can look at art collections. What I thought was interesting about what Art Basel had done is they'd taken all of the artists and also all of the galleries that would have been part of that festival and given all of those galleries a presence. I think it was more than 200 galleries from across the world, 30 something countries. And as a result of that, you really have this opportunity when you log into the Art Basel website, which is totally free, by the way, to just consume this art in a totally different way. And I'm not a art patron. I think. I mean, I don't really buy that much art. I do love looking at art. I do love experiencing art, and I love museums as much as kind of anyone else does. I think. Um, but this was a cool example of something that was live that got canceled, that was reimagined into a virtual experience, and was just a cool way of bringing that experience out. And I found that I actually spent way more time than I thought I would checking it out. And so I highly recommend doing that if you have time for a diversion of a bit, or if you love art as well. It was just a really really smart initiative, and it looked great. The branding was beautiful. It was just a great experience online. So I definitely recommend that. Another story that actually was two stories that connected to one another, and that's what sometimes happens some weeks, were about how we are slowly discovering things about our world right now that we didn't know, because technology is allowing us to dig backwards. So, for example, there was a sonar technology, a radar technology that allows scientists to see a city that used to exist thousands of years ago, but is now long buried underneath whatever's there now. And there was another mapping initiative that was mapping, they say, 1/5 of the Earth's ocean floor. And the first thing I thought when I heard that was, man, there's a lot of the ocean floor that we haven't mapped, that we don't that we don't see. And and that's really amazing, that there's so much of Earth that we just haven't explored. I mean, I just think that that's fascinating. But uh, what was cool about this project is it launched, I believe, in 2017, and at the point when it launched, they had mapped about 6% of the Earth's ocean bed. And over the past year, they've done another 15%. So the progress is really amazing if you think about it, in terms of how fast they're doing this now that they have the technology for it. And who knows what they'll discover when they start doing that. And I think that this idea of discovery and using technology to figure out that discovery, whether it's looking backwards into the past or looking into the ocean seabed floor, uh, is really cool and doesn't get enough attention oftentimes. And one of the things I try and do in this weekly show and in my weekly email uh, is talk about the stories that I think need more attention. And this is one of them, because if we could look at how people lived 2,000 years ago and maybe why they died, maybe it could teach us something for today. And same thing with the ocean seabed. I mean, who knows what's living down there? It's just a really fascinating thing to think about, even if we aren't necessarily thinking about it on a daily basis, because it's not what we do, right? And it's easy to forget how cool some of these discoveries are. And so that was one of those pieces that just reminded me of that. So, just a quick reminder that if you are watching this show on YouTube or Facebook or any of the platforms where we're live streaming to, you can subscribe to get the newsletter, the email newsletter every week, and it will be coming into your inbox every Thursday morning. So if you enjoy these stories and if you want to read them a little bit before everybody else, I definitely recommend that. And one of the things that I've started doing in this video show is I've started doing a weekly feature. And this weekly feature is about the double take story of the week. And the double take story of the week that I wanted to share is about Columbus, Ohio. Um, and Columbus, Ohio has a petition to uh, rename their town Flavortown, which is a interesting choice. There's a lot of challenges um, with there's a lot of challenges with the name Columbus. So Columbus, Ohio, is a place that has a lot of interesting and negative history. If you know the history of Christopher Columbus and how he maybe wasn't the best guy, but the double take here is well, now they're aiming to rename it Flavortown, partially because of this famous chef Guy Fieri, who has kind of become a namesake for the town. And it may be replacing one negative person with somebody else who might have a negative background as well. And he seems to be a good guy and he's done a lot of cool stuff. But who knows, right? And this is one of the challenges behind naming something like based on a story of right now. And I think that what we're seeing right now in the world is people are trying to topple statues. They're trying to like remove history or change history in many ways. And look, people feel very strongly about multiple aspects of this, right? Some people feel like, well, we're commemorating something that shouldn't be commemorated, and people who don't deserve to be seen as heroes are being treated as heroes. And on the flip side, people are saying, look, we're just remembering history of things that actually happened, and we shouldn't forget these things. And we should put up monuments because sometimes they're monuments for things that we don't want to repeat. And whether you see it as a monument to something that we want as a reminder of something we shouldn't do, or as a celebration of somebody who doesn't deserve it, the point is that we are rethinking how we celebrate history. And one of the ways is by renaming things, and maybe renaming Columbus, Ohio is a good idea. I mean, I don't think Columbus deserves any of, based on what I've read, I don't think he deserves to be treated as a hero at all either. I mean, he exterminated a large population of Native Americans who were here. Uh, but maybe Flavortown isn't the right way to go either for Columbus. So it's just one of those stories where it kind of got me thinking like, well, there's a different way to think about this, and maybe we shouldn't just immediately react and go for Flavortown. Another story that I was paying attention to this week is kind of a long-standing one. I've written about this many times in the past. It's about data and who should own and profit from data. And part of the thing that I've written about, and part of the challenge here, and what Andrew Yang has been pushing for some time, is for us as consumers to be able to share in the revenue that's generated from all of our data, in terms of how Facebook or any of these platforms can sell that to get advertisers. And that on the surface seems like a logical thing, right? I mean, they're selling our details, so we should be able to get a cut of that, right? That's just fair. Uh, the flip side of that argument is, well, we're using this platform, Facebook, in many different ways, or whatever other platform, whether it's Google or LinkedIn or any of these other platforms, and we're not paying for them directly, at least. And so that's how they monetize us. We become the product, right? If we're not paying for it, if we're paying for it, we're a customer. But you're not a customer generally of Google. You're not a customer of Facebook. You're the product. You're what they're selling, and they're monetizing you. And the argument for you sharing in part of that revenue is fair and makes sense. The detractors of that also have an interesting point, which is if we start sharing in the profit, then maybe we become less concerned about privacy. And we say, well, I'll just share this stuff because I'm making money on it, which is a short-sighted decision in some ways, because we might end up agreeing to, like checking that checkbox on the terms and conditions that we aren't necessarily paying attention to what we agreed to. And later on, that might cause us to have trouble. Now, human beings are notoriously bad at thinking long term when it comes to stuff like this. And if somebody said to you, hey, we'll start paying you X amount of dollars per month to use your Facebook data, a lot of people will say yes without even caring about the privacy implications. And that's part of the challenge. And so one of the things I think with a story like this to think about is, do we really want those couple of bucks? And that's basically what it would be. I mean, nobody's going to pay you probably more than that because it's all en masse. Is it worth it to trade the privacy for getting some small piece of the revenue? Should we even be allowed to have that sort of model? And by the way, will the big tech companies go for it? Because that's going to cost them. Somebody's going to have to pay that, right? And it's going to come out of what they're paying for, what they're being paid by the advertisers. And so there's lots and lots of questions around this, but it's one of those stories that sometimes I share a story and it's like, oh, this is interesting this week. There's a bag that you can pee in, right? And sometimes there's a story like this, which has legs that's going to last for a long time and is really something that I'm paying attention to for the long term, and one that I suggest you do as well. So the next story is a bit of a lighthearted one, and this one is kind of around what you get remembered for. And it's a story of it's a obituary basically for Joel Schumacher, who's a film director who did many different films, some great films, but he is sort of notoriously remembered for the really bad Batman and Robin film, which had Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze and had George Clooney playing Batman, and made the distinct choice to put nipples on the Batman suit. And so now he is remembered, and actually knew he would be remembered for Batman nipples. In fact, there was an article that I read where he talked about how that would probably be on his tombstone, that he put nipples on the Batman suit. So I guess you can't figure out what you get remembered for. But this story was a little bit of kind of candy. It was fun to read. And it also led me towards sort of a related article. And this one was from Vanity Fair magazine. And it was not really all that useful, this article. So I didn't even include the title of it, which is unusual for me. I only included the visual here to show you, because the visual is a picture of George Clooney with a full beard. And I think we can objectively agree George Clooney is a devastatingly good looking guy. I don't think the beard is ideal as a choice for him. But what was funny about this is, like, that's what I got from this article, the picture of George Clooney with a beard. And that was it. And one of the things I talk about every week is that we as individuals have to choose to be what I call non-obvious thinkers. And non-obvious thinkers are people who spend time paying attention to lots and lots of things, whether they are that interested in them or not. And this was one of those perfect examples, I think, of a story that was from a media source that I don't tend to pay too much attention to. I mean, most stuff I see on Vanity Fair is basically candy. It's pictures of celebrities that are interesting for some people, but don't really add that much to the world. And this was basically that. But by paying attention to that and by seeing that and putting that in context with the Batman nipples and all of those things, I mean, it just gives me a little bit less of a serious picture of the world, and a little bit more of just the fact that this is what people are interested in, this is what people are paying attention to. And I think that one of the things that's tempting to do, especially for me, is to get a little too intellectual about what I read. And I read a lot, and I spend a lot of time talking about what it means and the deeper meaning, and about the future and trends and all of those things. And I know that for many of you, like, that's why you read my stuff. That's why you pay attention to what I share, because it's serious. But sometimes we need a little candy to provide context. And just looking at a picture of George Clooney with a beard, I mean, that's candy. And you don't, not every candy is good, right? I mean, nobody wants butterscotch candy. Like, sometimes that's basically Clooney in a beard. But you can't always win. The point is, let's pay attention to more stuff that's out there. Let's pay attention to lots of different things, because they help us to get a better picture, a more complete picture of the world. Another story that I was reading about was IKEA launching the Home of Tomorrow urban concept, which they unveiled in Poland. And this is a story from Inside Retail in Asia that talked about this. And if you look at some of the visuals of this article, what you'll see is that they basically do the same thing that most pictures of the home of the future or the home of tomorrow do, which is they have lots and lots of greenery built into the home. And it's sort of this outside inside concept. And that's what a lot of people who are imagining the future of what our homes will look like, that's a big piece of how they imagine our homes to be. And I thought this was interesting in the theme of it, which is you'll see this over and over again. And I remember a couple years ago, I went to CES, and one of the things that really captured my attention was the home of the future had a refrigerator of the future. And the refrigerator of the future was deconstructed in the sense that it wasn't one place in your kitchen where you put all of your food. The food was spread out into different types of containers based on the level of refrigeration required. So your meat would be like in a little meat refrigerator, which would be in a separate place. Your bread would be in a different place. Your dairy would be in a different place. And everything was at its slightly different temperature based on the temperature that was optimal for that thing. Your freezer would be in a different place. And by doing that, they could spread it out in various places. So your bread fridge or temperature controlled unit would be in a separate spot. from everything else. And that's the sort of reimagining of the home of the future that I find really worth sharing and worth paying attention to, because when you see these images, it helps you to picture what that could be and what your interior could be. And that's what these homes of the future do. And so this article was kind of about that new way of doing it, that next version of doing it. Another article that I was reading about that kind of got me a little worried, actually, was about Facebook testing an app called Forecast for making predictions about world events. And if you see some of the questions that they had in this app as a beta, it was, will Tiger King on Netflix get a spin-off season? And 63% of people say yes. When a COVID-19 vaccine is discovered, will it be available for free for people living in the US? And 80% of people say no. That people and what was disturbing about this, I think, is that they are gamifying these big questions and positioning them as insights, positioning them as forecasts, as if they have some merit. And the idea behind this is that they will invite scientists and academics and people who may have a level of credibility in order to make these forecasts. But the challenge is, like, if you invite a scientist who studies one thing and you ask them their prediction or their forecast about something else, there's no scientific method applied to that. There's no diligence applied to it. And that may not be their expertise area that they're now commenting on. And so now we're just supposed to take forecasts from random scientists because they're a scientist. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And it perpetuates the same problem that I think happens all the time on Facebook, which is things are presented as if they're truth when actually they're just opinion. And this is a major problem with our social media, and definitely a major problem across Facebook. And it's just sad to see them working on innovations that'll just make that worse. It doesn't make any sense. Why would you create something like this to perpetuate that instead of trying to find a better way to figure out what is actually truth and feature experts who are doing real things in their body of expertise and sharing that and then helping to amplify that? I mean, there's just so many other things to do. So this was not a great story, but one that I still thought was worth sharing and worth talking about this week. And the final thing I want to share with you this week is the non-obvious book release of the week. So every week I pick a book that was newly released and talk about its significance and why I think it's a great book for you to pick up. And so this week I wanted to talk about a book called The Biggest Bluff by Maria Konnikova. And this is about this is kind of one of those styles of books that I really like, which is a journalist. There's a bunch of books that have been in this style. A journalist gets interested about a topic and then embeds himself or herself in that world in order to learn about it. It was the same thing with Moonwalking with Einstein, which was an amazing book about memory and training your memory. And in The Biggest Bluff, what Maria Konnikova does is she embeds herself into the world of professional poker and really explores what it takes to be a winner in poker. Is it luck? Is it skill? Is it both? And the big thing that she finds, and the big thing she talks about in the book, is that skill and our belief that skill plays a huge piece in how successful we are is perhaps an overestimate. That we overestimate how much our skill makes a difference, and we underestimate how much all the other external factors make a difference. And so that was what this book talked about. It was the non-obvious book release of the week. I found that book fascinating, and I highly recommend you check that out. The last thing I want to share back with you is, if you like these stories and you want to talk about them, and oh, I see a great comment here from Claire, design concept for home hydroponic garden. Good stuff. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for commenting. By the way, if you're listening to this on record, that's great. If you're commenting live and if you're watching live, thank you. I appreciate you. I see another great story. There's some great resources here. If you're watching this afterwards and you want to check out some of these things that some of my listeners and some of your folks who are watching right now are sharing, really, really good stuff to check out. And I'm going to check that out afterwards and post about it. If you want to get these stories in your inbox every Thursday morning, you can definitely subscribe to the email newsletter. And it is at nonobvious.com/subscribe. to get the email newsletter. And if you want to come and join us for the virtual summit on book marketing, you can register for that at nonobvious.com/book marketing. So I hope to see you at some of these things. Thank you for joining me once again for the Non-Obvious Insights show, and sharing a little bit about some of the most interesting and underappreciated stories of the week. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and I have been curating these stories for you. Thank you for listening.